I'm going to start from the cost point logon page. The link that we went over with timesheet.idsi is the same link you're going to use to access this login page. Your login ID and your password, all of this is the same as the employee training. So if you need a refresher on this, please revert back to the timesheet training. That'll help you log in, as well as a nice refresher on timesheets. So I'm going to actually log in directly into the system by clicking on login, and it's going to automatically take me to my timesheet. To navigate to my expense reports and my expense authorizations, I have a couple options. I can simply close out of my timesheet here, and it'll take me to my homepage of Cost Point or Time and Expense 10, the new system. Or Michael's been very kind and has created a My menu over here that has a star. And under this star, you'll be able to go to Expense Authorization and Expense Reports. So for this example, I'm going to close out of the timesheet, and I'll navigate via the menu to the expense authorizations. We need to do an expense authorization first if we have a travel expense report or are going on travel. So the authorization is required to do an expense report for your travel expenses. So therefore, we're going to start there first by doing our expense authorization. So when you log into CostPoint and you close out of your timesheet screen, as an employee, you will see time and expense, you'll see time, and you'll see expense. Under time, you'll see time, timesheets, manage timesheets, and under expense, you'll see expense authorizations, and you'll see expense reports. So we need to do our authorization first before we do our expense report. So if we're going on travel, I need to do this first, preferably before I take my trip. So I'm going to go to expense authorizations, and as an employee, I'll see my manage expense authorization and print expense authorization report. To perform the expense authorization, we're going to click on manage expense authorization. If I had any other authorizations that I've completed ahead of time, those will come up first. As you can see here, I had one for the 24th through the 27th. To enter a new authorization, we'll click on New up here at the top. This is to create a brand new authorization. If you notice, this screen is broken into two sections. We have the Manage Expense Authorization section up here at the top and the Planned Expenses down at the bottom. This format is probably different than what you are used to. This is the standard format for the new system, and even though it looks different, you'll find that as you get more and more used to it, it'll be very intuitive for you. So the first thing we're going to do is click on the New button up at the top. We don't want to click New down here. This will create a new expense on the current authorization. So don't click New down here in the Planned Expenses line. Click New up at the Manage Expense Authorizations. So I'm going to click on New. And as you can see, it blanked out everything. So it's a brand new expense authorization. Today's date will automatically default in. This is the date that we are going to use. Let me back up for a second. If you notice, there's total of 4 tabs on this expense authorization section. This is absolutely vital to the success of your expense authorization as well as your expense report. The expense reports look pretty much identical to this screen. You must complete this entire section, the top section, first by utilizing each one of these tabs before you start claiming or planning any expenses on the authorization. The reason for that is the expenses that you claim or plan will look at the information you put in the expense authorization section or the header section of this authorization. Based on the criteria you put in the header, it will create all of the accounting information that needs to be applied against each expense when you go to claim it or plan it. So that is the first thing we're going to do. We're going to go tab by tab and complete these in their entirety to ensure we capture all the relevant data for this authorization before we start planning our expenses. So a description. This is travel to Louisiana for training. It is always going to be a travel type. Non-travel related expenses do not require an authorization. Only the travel expense reports will require you to have an authorization filled out first. So I'm going to leave this at travel. This will be your only option. There's no other options other than travel. Next, we're going to place our dates for the trip itself. Oh, so I'm going to be making this trip on August 27th, 2018, and it's going to go through the 31st of August. The purpose of this trip is to perform client site training. Once I've completed this first tab for purpose, I'm going to then select the location in which I'm going to travel. First thing I want to do is go to the country, and I'll select United States. The next thing I'm going to select is state. Now I can start typing this in, and it'll give me a drop down based upon the table that is available for that field. So if I start typing Louisiana, it starts to come in. And let's see here. We'll pick our city. Why not? Let's pick that one. And as you can see, the county will automatically populate based on the city. If I choose to leave a comment for this location, I can. I can put the comment in. This is not a required field as it does not have a red asterisk. And the last thing that you see here is frequent location. This is a checkbox that allows you to utilize this location for future authorizations and or expense reports. So over here to the right, or excuse me, to the left, this is where my frequent locations will be stored. So as you begin doing your authorizations and you get more and more, and same with your expense reports, you can save these locations for future use instead of going through and choosing the country, the state, the city, the county. You can simply choose from your list of frequent locations here, and it'll populate the rest of this data. Now that I've added my location and have completed my locations tab, I'm going to move again over to the next tab for default charges. So this says, what is the charge code that is going to correlate to my expenses? So what is the charge for this trip? So for this scenario, it's very similar to selecting a charge code for your timesheet. We click on that magnifying glass, it brings up a drop down, and I can drill down to my direct project. And if I only have one, I can leave the allocation at 100%. But what if I have, maybe some additional charges that are not going to be 100% to the project? Maybe I have an indirect charge that I need to charge, but it's only one of them. If I have to do that, then I'll click on New, and I'll add another charge code. So for this scenario, I'll select overhead. As you can see over here to the right, it changed my default allocation to 50-50. Well, this will split every expense that I claim 50% to the project and 50% to the customer site for overhead. I don't really want that. I want all of my charges to go to the project by default. So that's why it's called default allocation. So now by changing it from 100 to 0, every time I add an expense, it will automatically default against that specific charge code. I'll show you down below when we start actually claiming expenses on how to actually change that so you can modify that cost to go against a different project if you needed to. So now that I've completed my default charges, I'm going to click on the Details tab, and as you can see, there's nothing for me to complete on this. I highly recommend, as soon as you finish filling out your header tabs and information, to save and continue. So save and continue will keep us on the current record, and now it's created a shell for all the expenses that we want to put into our expense authorization. Says that our record has been successful, modifications successfully completed, so this tells me it's been saved. As you can see up here at the top, it's provided me an authorization ID. At this point, I can now start putting in the costs that I expect to incur for my trip. So I'm going to click on New, down here on the planned expenses. So I'm going to enter my first expense, and I'm going to choose from a category. So by hitting the magnifying glass, it gives me a different options of different types of expenses that I can select from. So let's choose airfare. As you can see, the expense type automatically populated. If there's only one type of expense, this will happen. If not, it'll come up blank, and you'll have the ability to search for it. So airfare is the one we're choosing, and I estimate that cost to be about $500. So $500 for my airfare, I expect that to go against my project. So under my charge allocations, I can see right here how it's going to treat that cost. It's going to put 100% to airfare. Now, if I said I don't want it to go to airfare to go to the project, I want it to go to overhead, I can zero out that allocation and change that to 100% to go against the overhead code. This is how you do your allocation against the authorization. Now I'm going to change this back. I want this truly going against the project. But I wanted to show you as an example, all of my expenses are going to go against the project, but I wanted to show you the example of how you can allocate the cost between different projects. Now that I'm done with my allocation, and I've picked my airfare and put in my estimated cost, I like to save and continue as I go along. You don't have to, but I highly recommend that you do. That way, if you ever come across the connectivity issue, your record has been saved and you don't have to go back and do it from scratch. So let's add another one. Let's click New. Well, I know I had airfare. Well, I'm also going to need to put in my lodging. So I'm going to select lodging. As you can see, lodging under the category for lodging, this is the only one available. Lodging and hotel. My location automatically populates. If I had multiple trips, I can identify that in my header ahead of time and say that this was for the 27th to the 29th and another location from the 29th to the 31st. By doing so, it will allow me to select the location in which I am staying. In this example, we only have the one location. How do I know what the cost should be for my lodging? Well, the estimate will always compute based on the per diem rate. And those per diem rates are already loaded into the system for you ahead of time. So you can click on the per diem rates tab and see what that lodging rate is for that time frame, for that location that we have selected. It'll also tell me what my per diem is and how it's broken out. Now that I've added my lodging and I've added my airfare, I'm going to save and continue yet again. At this point, I'm done. If I had any others, I can continue to click new and add additional expenses that are planned. And when I'm done, I can simply click on submit. By signing this authorization, I'm certifying the expenses to be incurred on the charge and day specified are in accordance with IDSI's policies and procedures. Okay. Now at this point, my expense authorization has been submitted, and I want to know what's the next step in the workflow. Well, actually, let me back up for a second. I don't have enough money for this, and I need to request in advance. So in order for me to submit in advance, I can click on the advance link right here, click on new, and put in the amount that I anticipate for my advance. Well, I need to do, let's see here. Under my details, I planned $872 for this trip. So I'd like to request $872 for this trip. And the date I need it by is, well, I'm leaving on what day? I'm leaving on the 27th, so I should have this by the 26th. Need an advance for airfare and the lodging. Okay. All right. Once I've entered in my advance request, I'll click Save and Continue. And now I've submitted a request for advance. So let's take a look at the status of this authorization. I want to know, where is this authorization as far as my approval process goes, and where is the status of my advance. So I'm going to click on Workflow. Under Workflow, I can see exactly what are the next steps to ensure that this gets completed. Well, I've already created it. This has been completed. So as soon as we opened it up, it completed that task. When we click Submit, it completed the Submit task. Now it's moved on to my primary supervisor for approval. So my supervisor has received a notification that he needs to go in and approve this. He also received a notification down here for the advance that he needs to approve my advance. So at this point, as an employee, I'm done with my authorization and my request for advance. So now I can close this. And when I go on my trip, I can begin submitting my expense report when I get back. So to do so, I can either use the star to go to Manage Expense Report, or I can navigate to the Expense Reports, Manage Expense Report. So let's go in here. Let me take a look. It looks like I have a couple expense reports here. Let me clear this other one out really quickly. Expense report 1000. That's linked to my advance of the 1000. Clear these all out. I'm going to come into expense report. And if I don't have any, again, it'll come up blank. If I do have some, they pop up and I have to click new. For this example, I'm going to do my expense report for a previous authorization that I had for my travel. I have an option to select between general expenses and a travel expense report. There's different rules to each one, and those will be notated with a red asterisk on the expense report. So for this example, we're going to use travel. I have to put in the date that I'm submitting the expense and a description of what we're actually doing. Next, I need to select the authorization that was approved. So here's my authorization that I had previously done before I took the trip, and I've selected that. If you notice, the purpose automatically populates, and so does the from and to date. The location automatically populates. My default charges automatically populates. The header section automatically is taken care of for you off of your authorization. So when you're doing that authorization, be mindful that you capture all the charge codes you need and all the locations you need. Once this is ready to go and I have my header filled out, again, I'm going to save and continue. Now I can start adding in expenses because my header section has been completed. So I'll come down to the claimed expense line and click New. Again, my options are the same as the authorization. So I'm going to select lodging. When I selected lodging, it automatically populated my location because I only had the one. The expense type automatically populated. The date I stayed populated, and the date the expense was incurred was populated. You always want to make sure that when you're claiming your expense, you're capturing the correct date in which you incurred the expense. I have a couple questions that have popped up here. I'll cover those here in a minute on this actual expense report. I'll show you exactly how the meals work with the per diem as well as the lodging. So any comments I want to put in here, I can put in. So if I had something that maybe my lodging was over ceiling, put a comment into why it was over ceiling. This is a great way to communicate with the accounting team so they don't have to come back to you and ask you why your costs are what they are. You can put an actual explanation in the comments section for each expense, and it'll help along with the approval process of your expense report. So now that we've completed the details section, we have our check-in, check-out date, we have all of our expense types, the date we incurred the expense, and any comments we want to put in. Same logic with the header section, moving from left to right on the tabs. We're going to do the same thing down here. Well, my expense that I incurred was $300. The ceiling says it's $279. Let's take a look at how the system knows what those rates should be. You have your per diem rates table down here. The lodging is $93 per day. This does not include tax. Only when your base lodging rate exceeds the per diem rate is when you will have an overage over ceiling. Otherwise, it will not show up as an over ceiling expense. So I'm going to close this out. I'm going to put down my $300. That was how much I incurred. That's what I'm going to be reimbursed. If I have any personal expenses, I can claim those and it'll be deducted from my expense reimbursement. If anything was unallowable, I can claim it as unallowable. The system will automatically do the accounting for you. So you just need to capture those costs as either personal or unallowable if you have any. For this example, we're going to leave these zeros. So $300 is what I paid. I'm going to select room rates, again using the logic left to right. And for each day, I'm going to put in what my rate was. $90 for the rate and $10 worth of tax. If I stayed extra and one of those days were personal, I can identify it as a personal day and it will not reimburse me for that. So once I'm done with this, I'll come back to my details tab, take another look, make sure I captured everything that I wanted. And I also want to know, where is this charge going? Maybe I need to allocate this cost to a different charge code. Well, where I would do that allocation is you have different links down here at the bottom that tells you exactly where the accounting is going to go. So I'm going to open up the unallowable, the oversealing, as well as the undersealing. So everything, because it was undersealing, is going $300 to the undersealing information. It's going to go against my G&A charge code, the accounts applied, the organizations applied, so I don't have to touch any of this. However, if I had a different charge code I wanted this to go to, I should have notified it up here first. It would have shown me that additional charge code down here, and then I could either have allocated by percentage or click the allocate by amount and change the amount to which line I want it to go to. So at this point, I'm okay with my expenses and how it's being captured and where it's going to go. Usually you don't have to worry about this. The system's automatically going to take care of it for you, especially if you have one charge code. But if you have multiple charge codes, I highly recommend you take a look at your unallowable over and under sealing just to make sure things are going to where you want them to. At this point, I will save and continue, and I've captured my lodging expense. Let's create a new one for per diem. Let's take a look at how per diem works. So I'm going to click New, select my category. I'm going to click on Meals, and per diem meals is automatically populated. I don't have to touch anything on this. I'll move from left to right on my tabs, and I'll select the days that I'm claiming my per diem. Now, what happens if maybe somebody had bought me dinner and it was a business meeting or something while we were on travel? I shouldn't be claiming my per diem for that. So I would uncheck my dinner box and I wouldn't be reimbursed for that. Now, if that day identifies that somebody maybe claimed that expense and claimed that I was part of that dinner, I wouldn't be able to claim my expense for that dinner because the system would understand that I already had that meal taken care of. But if it's just me and I'm going on my trip and I'm claiming my per diem, I check the days that I want to claim my per diem, and then I'll come over to the amount section and it automatically calculated 178.5. How do I know that's correct? Well, let's take a look at our per diem rate. The per diem rate says it's $51 per day. $51, and I receive 75% for the first day, 75% for the last day, plus 51 for the second day and the third day, 178.5. So the system already does this calculation for you. All you need to do is check the days you're claiming your per diem. So I'll save and continue this. And if I had any other expenses, I can simply add them on in. Go in here, maybe I had mileage, right? Travel to airport. I'll click on my details. I'll put in my number of miles. It was 50 miles. And the system automatically calculates the cost based upon the current mileage rate. I can save and continue this. And I've finished my expense report. I'm done with this. I no longer have any other expenses I want to claim. I've gone through, I've made sure that the days that I've claimed my expenses were on the days that I have actually incurred the expense, at which point I can come into the header section and click on Submit. Okay. Now my expense report has been submitted. What is the next step in the process of my expense report? Under the workflow, it will show me what needs to happen next. So the receipts need to be uploaded. Well, at this point, your process is the exact same. You're going to be sending your receipts to receipts@idsi.com. You no longer need to print off the receipt traveler, so you only need to submit your receipts. At which point that'll be attached. It'll move on to your supervisor for approval, and then the accounting team will process it. Any questions?
Could you touch real quick on how an advance would be applied to this if they'd requested it on the EA?
Yes. So if you have an advance that you took for your trip and you need to claim that on your expense report, there will be an additional advance link for you to select. When you click on that link, you'll see the advance that you received. You would check that box and click OK, and it applies that advance against your expense report. So when you claim all of your expenses, it will, at the end, on your Details tab, you'll see the advance calculation reduce the amount that'll be reimbursed back to you. I can't show you an exact example because there wasn't an advance actually entered against this. I can create one to show you, but it literally will be a link down here to click Advance. You select it, and it'll offset your expenses here.
And any advances that are approved for that EA get automatically checked in that advance box he was talking about. And you can't uncheck it.
So once you select your authorization, if you had an advance link to that, the system's automatically going to apply that against your expense report. Thank you, Michael. Any other questions? Great question. Where would I do a tuition reimbursement expense report? Well, when we go to create an expense report, we selected the travel expense report. Primarily, these are probably going to be the most of the expense reports that you submit. However, if you have non-travel related expense reports, you'll come to New, put your description in. We're going to select the general expense report type. And as soon as we did that, notice that some of these tabs changed. The format of this expense report changed. Tuition reimbursement. I'm going to pick my charges. I'm going to say this is for my direct project. At this point, I'll save it because I completed all my tabs. I'll come down to New, select Continuous Education. Under Continuous Education, I have continuous education and seminar and conference fees. I'll select continuous education, and automatically the system knows where to put it. And I simply select the amount that it was. I'll save it and submit.